So hi Chris, how are you doing today?
Great, great.
I think people would like to know a little bit about Nimbula, how it was started, who were the founders, and what was its sole mission.
Okay, so I was one of the founders. My partner's Willem van Biljon, an old friend of mine from South Africa. And we decided a couple of years ago to build some software that allowed enterprises and service providers to build out a new generation cloud infrastructure in which firstly the infrastructure could be shared with whomever they chose to share it with, and secondly the rate of innovation for their customers could be rapidly expanded. So that's what we've been working on for the last couple of years.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the typical user for Nimbula, and what are some use cases that go with that?
Sure. Well, one of the things we're trying to do is break down this false dichotomy of public cloud, private cloud. But to us, it's all about applications and around computing. So typical use cases for our first version of Nimbula Director are technology companies who are trying to rapidly build and deploy applications on behalf of multiple customers, collaborate with those customers, co-develop with those customers. Our first customer is a company called EPAM. They build some of the world's best-known applications that people use every day. And their challenge is improving the efficiency of their software delivery model. So instead of shipping software, which is what they've been doing for the last 10 years, they're now able to host software and co-develop with their customers and more rapidly innovate and deliver features, which is very rewarding for them as well as their clients.
So a lot of these customers are delivering SaaS applications themselves in a multi-tenant framework? Correct.
So there's elements of multi-tenancy, but purely under the control of the owner of the infrastructure. They get to decide which organizations get to use what sort of resources they get to consume, what applications get deployed where, and so on. So there's a very strong policy-driven framework in our software. So multi-tenancy is something baked in with a really strong security model. And then cloud technologies tend to be more applicable right now to the development of new applications. The greenfield opportunity there, the efficiency is there compared to older applications where there's a lot of concern about how do I make all the old stuff work but still provide all this elasticity, lower cost, and so on. That just takes a lot of time.
So what would you say was one of the biggest business problems that you helped customers solve?
So we're trying to do a few things. One is trying to drive down the cost of the infrastructure by not requiring particularly high-end server infrastructure, network-based infrastructure. Improve agility by having the right kind of security model which maximizes the degree to which developers and operators can interact in real time with their infrastructure. As well as provide the kinds of services that allow those developers to deploy their applications where they want to, subject to the control of the different organizational policies, but to do that in a way that's as self-service as much as possible, and that just increases the rate at which innovation and change can happen, which we think is very important.
So there's some deep identity management granularity in your offering.
Yeah, so all of our software, whether it's deployed privately or publicly, has very strict notions of who you are, what organization you're in. This can scale to many hundreds or thousands of users, groups, organizations. And there's a very strong, very flexible permissions model, permission service, which allows owners of resources, owners of applications, network storage services to define who gets to consume these. So it becomes much more easy to allow service teams to operate independently at the pace at which they need to operate without having to wait for admins to configure virtual data centers or set up projects or set up networks. It's entirely self-service. So what's disruptive is, for the first time, we have a new cloud operating system which automatically builds out infrastructure. So the same day you accumulate hardware, this is up and running inside clusters under your control with no human intervention. That's the first thing. Second thing is, this is then federated into a set of data center locations, some under your control, some might be under other people's control. And as soon as that hardware comes up, within minutes, all of a sudden, any of your customers who have the appropriate permission can consume that infrastructure and launch applications in any way, any location that they can. There's a much higher degree of self-service than what's gone on before. And that's largely enabled by our permission system, as well as our distributed network security mechanisms, which allow application owners to segment their environments, but again in an entirely self-service kind of way across multiple data centers and across multiple geographies. So really for the first time, what Nimbula Director has delivered is a very secure, very scalable, very distributed infrastructure service where application developers can deploy anywhere and aren't confined to these small infrastructure units bound by virtual networks or virtual data centers. So that's the important contribution that we're making.
Do you have any past partnerships?
We do. We recently partnered with VMware, and we now support the Cloud Foundry stack on top of Nimbula Director, and we'll continue to improve that. So today it's trivially easy for any user in a Nimbula Director cloud to instantiate a Cloud Foundry system and start to launch their Cloud Foundry applications. It auto scales. We've developed an HA capability for all of the services necessary to support Cloud Foundry. Our core belief, though, is to do this correct at scale, you have to have the foundations correct, which consists of strong infrastructure components. And on top of that, you can then layer multiple different application frameworks, such as Cloud Foundry.
So Chris, what's the future vision for Nimbula?
So the future vision for Nimbula is this global network of data centers, some entirely public and shareable by large service providers, through to more private data centers operated by large enterprises for their own internal development, and then single entry points where any user can apply for entitlements in any of those infrastructures and deploy any application in seconds anywhere in the world, wherever they have customers, wherever they have data. So our goal is just to eliminate much of the friction involved in the developer communities need to deploy their applications as rapidly as possible. That's ultimately what we want to achieve, and we do that through lowering the total cost of operating this infrastructure, and we do this through the fine-grained entitlements which allow the owners of this infrastructure to give as much power as possible to the developer community so that they can operate and launch their applications in as rapid a way as they can develop, rather than be limited by the responsiveness of the infrastructure itself. We have hosted environments where people can come along and evaluate, first of all, our offering, and then secondly, begin to evaluate how they would deploy their applications in such an environment. And this can range from very simple upload and run to more complicated take advantage of the depth of Nimbula Director through our services framework, our launch plans, and so on. So there's hosted frameworks for that. Many customers choose to do that in their own labs. And this is something we support several customers a day through.